Hey, it's XRP Vision, and lately the crypto market has been sending signals that don't really add up on the surface. Over the past few days, we've watched a heavy liquidation event unfold. Leverage has been flushed out aggressively, fear crept back into sentiment, and price action across the board looks unstable and fractured. Normally, when you see this kind of damage, it comes with a clear narrative. A headline, a policy shock, some obvious catalyst everyone can point to. But this time, that clarity just isn't there. And while price looks weak, something else is happening quietly in the background that completely contradicts what the charts are trying to tell us. At the exact same time this liquidation played out, some of the most credible builders in crypto have started speaking very openly about what comes next. Not influencers chasing engagement, not anonymous accounts throwing out wild predictions, but executives, founders, and long term players who actually shape the direction of this industry. And what they're saying is surprisingly consistent. They're not talking about some distant cycle years away. They're pointing to a specific window, and they're naming 2026 with a level of confidence that's hard to ignore. That combination alone should make you pause, because extreme fear and extreme confidence usually don't coexist like this. When markets truly break, confidence disappears. Leaders go quiet, language becomes cautious, and projections get softened. That's how real structural damage looks. But that's not what we're seeing right now. Instead, what we're seeing is leverage getting wiped while conviction at the top stays intact. That suggests something very different is happening. This looks less like belief leaving the market and more like positioning being forcefully reset. And that distinction matters a lot, especially if you're trying to understand where we are in the broader cycle. If you look at the data, the story becomes clearer. Open interest collapsed rapidly, funding flipped, and longs were pushed out in a very short time frame. That kind of move usually comes from overcrowded positioning finally snapping, not from investors suddenly deciding crypto is over. There was no single event that caused this. It felt more like pressure that had been quietly building finally releasing all at once. That's often what shakeouts look like before markets transition into a new phase. What makes this moment so important is the disconnect between price behavior and insider messaging. While charts look messy, figures like Brad Garlinghouse are openly talking about new all-time highs. Leaders from exchanges, asset managers, and infrastructure companies are all hinting at the same timeline and the same opportunity window. They're not saying it lightly, and they're not hedging their words. That level of alignment doesn't usually happen randomly. So the real question isn't whether the market looks weak right now. It clearly does. The real question is whether this weakness is signaling a breakdown or a reset. From where I'm standing, this feels like the kind of uncomfortable phase that shows up right before sentiment flips. It's confusing by design, and it's meant to shake people out before clarity returns. How you interpret this moment will shape how you're positioned going forward, and that's exactly why paying attention now matters more than ever. What we're seeing right now on the price charts is clearly at odds with what's being said behind the scenes, and that contradiction is what makes this moment so difficult to read. Normally, when prices are pushed this low and volatility spikes, confidence dries up fast, people become cautious, language tightens, and projections disappear. But that's not what's happening here. Instead, we're watching a market that's being shaken aggressively while some of the most influential figures in the industry continue to speak with a surprising level of certainty about where things are headed. That disconnect alone tells me this move can't be fully understood just by staring at candles on a chart. This doesn't mean anyone is guaranteeing outcomes or saying price has to reverse immediately. Markets don't work like that. What it does mean is that if this were a true structural breakdown, you'd expect a very different tone from the people closest to the infrastructure. You'd hear hesitation, defensiveness, and carefully worded statements designed to manage expectations. Instead, what we're seeing is fear reflected in price while confidence shows up in language at the same time. That combination is rare, and it's usually where things start to get interesting. When you zoom out, it becomes clear that this isn't about a few optimistic comments. Optimism has always existed in crypto. What's unusual here is how specific and how public these statements have become. You've got Brad Garlinghouse openly talking about new all-time highs. You've got leaders from major exchanges, asset managers, and institutions all pointing toward the same general window. and they're not talking about some distant future years away. They're talking about 2026. That specificity matters because people at that level don't usually speak that way unless they feel something is lining up. That doesn't mean you throw caution out the window. Uncertainty is still very real, and nobody knows exactly how the path unfolds. Price could still go lower, and volatility is almost certainly not finished. But the way these leaders are speaking doesn't sound like hype or marketing. It sounds like people responding to conditions they can see forming before the broader market does. They're not coordinating, and there's no secret meeting. It's simply that people operating at that level tend to notice the same shifts at the same time. They see regulation evolving even when it's slow and messy. They see infrastructure being built even when price doesn't reflect it. They see pipelines forming that don't show up on charts yet. That's why this feels different from past cycles. Usually, price leads the conversation and narratives follow. This time, the conversation is getting louder while price is getting weaker. That reversal suggests this isn't about calling a top or bottom, it's about expectations being set ahead of a longer term transition that hasn't fully played out yet. Because of that, I don't interpret these comments as simple price predictions. I see them as signals about changing expectations rather than guarantees about short term movement. When enough people at the top start expressing similar views, it usually means the environment itself is shifting, even if the market hasn't caught up. That doesn't eliminate risk. It doesn't mean we can't experience deeper drawdowns or more uncomfortable volatility. But it does suggest that this sell off probably isn't the entire story. If the people closest to the infrastructure truly believed things were falling apart, we wouldn't be hearing this level of confidence expressed publicly. We also wouldn't be seeing the type of positioning that's quietly been happening over the past several months. That's what brings us to the real question. If this isn't random optimism or surface level marketing, then what exactly are they seeing that justifies this confidence while price looks so weak? When I strip it down, I keep coming back to factors that don't show up clearly on charts. The first is regulation. Even though it feels slow and chaotic from the outside, it's closer than it's ever been. People watching from the sidelines see delays and uncertainty. People on the inside see drafts, frameworks, negotiations, and timelines. Those are very different vantage points. You don't go on record the way some of these leaders have unless you believe the direction is largely set, even if the process isn't finished. The second factor is infrastructure. Compared to previous cycles, the ecosystem is far more developed. Custody solutions, on-ramps, tokenization platforms, settlement layers, payments, and compliance tooling all exist today in a way they simply didn't before. In past cycles, price ran ahead of reality. This time, reality is being built first, and price is lagging behind. That changes how risk and opportunity should be evaluated. The third factor is liquidity behavior. A lot of the leverage that exaggerated moves in previous cycles has already been flushed out. What remains is slower, more deliberate capital. That doesn't mean price can't move violently in the short term, but it does mean the next phase is less about speculation and more about allocation. When you combine these three elements, it sounds less like people predicting a straight line up and more like people acknowledging that the environment is changing enough for higher prices to become sustainable without the same fragility we've seen before. That distinction also explains why this sell-off feels so confusing. Short-term pressure is colliding with long-term preparation. Those forces can coexist for a while before the market resolves them. For me, that's not a signal to rush or panic. It's a signal to be thoughtful about positioning and patient with the process. That naturally leads into how I'm personally approaching this environment because that's the part that actually matters to me. I'm not trying to call the exact top or the exact bottom. I'm not assuming price can't go lower, and I'm also not waiting for everything to feel comfortable again before acting. Comfort usually shows up after opportunity has already passed. Instead, I'm positioning into weakness gradually and accepting volatility as part of the process. If the confidence we're hearing from industry leaders turns out to be correct, then this type of price action is exactly the phase people look back on and say it was uncomfortable, but it made sense. If they're wrong, then I haven't overextended myself chasing a narrative. That balance is important to me. What I don't see right now is the type of behavior that usually shows up when something is genuinely breaking. I see stress, leverage being removed, and fear surfacing, but I also see preparation happening in the background at the same time. That's why I keep coming back to the idea that this isn't just a sell off. It feels like a transition. There's a wealth transition taking place. That doesn't mean it's finished this week or that the path forward is easy. It means this is the part of the cycle where decisions matter more than emotions. One very simple principle I follow is that as fear increases, I buy. When fear becomes extreme, I buy more. History has consistently shown that when you zoom out, those moments tend to offer the best long term opportunities. Another thing that makes this easier for me is that I'm long term minded. How you hold assets matters just as much as what you hold. That's why I use structured approaches for part of my exposure, including tools that are designed for long term investors. Having systems in place reduces the pressure to react emotionally during volatility and helps me stay disciplined when markets are noisy. I also focus heavily on security and custody, especially in uncertain environments. Knowing that assets are held off exchange with institutional grade custodians and protected by systems designed to prevent unauthorized movement makes it easier to think long term. Having the ability to trade when needed, hold stable assets, and diversify beyond just price speculation adds another layer of stability. All of that contributes to staying patient while the market works through its phases. Beyond tools and positioning, there's something else that matters just as much, and that's not navigating markets like this alone. Uncertainty has a way of distorting thinking, and when your head isn't clear, even good information can become useless. That's why community and guidance matter more during volatile periods than during calm ones. It's not about intelligence, it's about having perspective and accountability when emotions start creeping in. Being surrounded by people who are thinking long term, asking the right questions, and holding each other accountable makes a huge difference. Regular conversations, live discussions, and reviewing strategies together help prevent isolation driven decisions. When something shifts in the market, you're not left trying to interpret it in a vacuum. You're processing it with others who are focused on the same long term goals. Education also plays a big role. Not surface level content, but information you can actually apply to your own situation. Having access to guidance, support, and structure helps keep you grounded when volatility tests your patience. And this is something a lot of people overlook, but your health is part of your wealth. If you're constantly stressed, anxious, or exhausted, your decision making will suffer no matter how good your strategy looks on paper. And that's why mindset, nervous system regulation, and overall well being matter in building anything long term. Staying mentally and physically sharp isn't separate from investing, it's part of it. Markets like this expose weaknesses in discipline and emotional control, and having support systems in place can make all the difference. I'll end with this. You are your greatest asset. How you think, how you react, and how you position yourself during uncertain times will shape your outcomes far more than any single trade. This phase of the market isn't about perfection. It's about staying intentional, staying patient, and not letting fear dictate your actions. Decisions made during moments like this often carry more weight than the ones made when everything feels easy. Stay wise, stay focused on the long term, and stay wealthy.